All right, let's talk about developments in East Asia from 600 to 1450, aka what is going on in China. So, when we are looking at China, we are looking at something called a dynastic cycle. Yes, that's intense. Okay, let's break that down. The idea of a cycle means that things happen kind of over and over, or they happen, or something happens, and then something else happens, and then it brings us back to that first thing. Um, when we're looking at a dynasty is this idea of a ruler and a couple generations from that ruler, all kind of controlling a country or an area under the same family name. So, dynastic cycle means that China is going through this repetition of, hey, we have this ruler. We like this ruler. This ruler and the family is going to stay in power until we think that they suck. And then we're going to decide that we need a new ruler. Hey, we like this new ruler. They're going to be in control for a couple generations. But now they suck, and we need some new people. This is a very simplified version of the dynastic cycle, and it's overly simplified, but it's essentially what happens. Um, the people decide that the new rulers come into power for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's assassination, sometimes they're taken over by the Mongols. um, we will get to that shortly. But around the time of 860, China is controlled by a family who, like, they use their family name as Song. And so the Song dynasty is going to be in control of China from about 860 to 1278. And before the Song was a group called the Tang. If you remember from our last unit, Tang Taizong, the guy who talked about effective leadership, yeah, that guy was a part of the Tang dynasty. So Tang is replaced by the Song, and the Song will be replaced by the Yuan. Now, the Song actually ended up ruling China for about 300 years, aka 3+ centuries. And when we're looking at where where the Song Dynasty was, it's kind of in this part of Asia. We have Southeast Asia over here, Khmer Empire over there, Southeast Asia, aka India, over here. So please ignore my terrible map. When we're looking at Song Dynasty, we are looking at a couple of different social things. One of those things is the idea of women. And, well, okay, women are a part of every culture, but the idea of this idea of foot binding. So what happened was that um, there was this ballet, and this ballet slash dancer performed for the emperor, and he was so impressed, and he thought that this woman may have been as well flying towards the sky, and she had dainty itty bitty feet, and he was just like super into it. So this idea of beauty came to be that the smaller your feet were, the prettier and more desirable you were. And so a bunch of people decided that, like, okay, let's make our feet smaller. So what they would do is they would take either, so you would start really young with this, and so the women would end up like as toddlers having their feet wrapped in bandages for a couple hours every day to start with, and they would soak their feet, and eventually over time they would keep the wrappings on all the time. Eventually, this causes your feet to deform, and the bones curl under where the bottom of your foot is, and your toes curl inwards, and it just, you, like, the ideal foot was about 3 inches. Not a lot of women got their feet that small, but on average, they got their feet about 5 inches. And if you measure that out, it's like about the length of, like, if you curl one of your fingers inwards, it's like about the size of your knuckle. That's about an inch. So 5 of those, and that was how big some of these women's feet were. Now, aside from it being pretty, one of the darker sides of this was that if your women had their feet bound and their feet were small, it was hard for them to walk. So women were not able to escape or were not able to live independently because they really couldn't walk anywhere on these itty bitty feet. And so it was used as a method to control the women and limit where they were able to go. One final part of foot binding was this idea of demonstrating your wealth. Peasants and poor people and poor farmers, they needed their women to help them in the fields. They needed their women to help them in the markets. They needed their women to help run the household. So if you were poor, your women would have normal feet. And that was just for peasants. But if you were in a higher class, or if you were trying to show off that you don't need your women to work, well, then your feet would probably be bound. So it came to be this social class separation. If you were wealthy enough, then you did not need your women to be able to walk. You had your women, your wives or your daughters, have their feet bound. Now, going into Romeo, leave it. Sorry. Going into other social ideas. One of the things was this idea of Neo-Confucianism. As we saw in ancient China, Confucius helped develop a philosophy that influenced China. And when we're looking at Confucius, he believed that moderation, that is, it's just as bad to have too much as it is to have too little. He also believed that social order could be decided on family relations. So if you were a person who respected their father or their grandfather or their elders, you were probably a good person. But if you did not respect your family, you were probably a bad person, and you were probably a bad citizen. This is an idea called filial piety. Filial piety is this idea that in exchange for respect towards your family and your elders, that you are able to be a part of that family and you just have a nurturing, loving relationship. Filial piety is the idea that in exchange for respect, that your family will guide you. One final success of the Song Dynasty in terms of social classes was this idea of public aid and free hospitals. The Song Dynasty was famous for this idea that they actually gave resources to the super poor people. So this was actually like the earliest form of public aid. And also, they were influenced a little bit by the Muslim and people who came in from the West, and they actually developed a free hospital that you could just walk in and be treated, and it was, no charge. So that was pretty impressive for the time. Another success of not success, another aspect of the social system in the Song Dynasty was the idea of where you ranked in society. At the top was the emperor. Below the emperor were actually scholars and people who took the civil service exam. We'll get to that in a moment. Below the scholars were people who owned land, and below the landowners were people who worked on the land, the farmers. Below the farmers were the artisans, or people who created artwork or skilled items. Below the artisans were merchants, people who just bought and sold items. And below the merchants were the urban poor, aka beggars, homeless people, orphans, and widows. Going into politics, the Song Dynasty was something called an imperial bureaucracy. An imperial bureaucracy is basically just a government that has an emperor or a king. In this case, it's an emperor. In that imperial bureaucracy, you have people who are assigned a job. These are people called officials. And your officials could be the Minister of Internal Affairs, or it could be the Minister of the Interior, Minister of Economics. Additionally, these officials answered directly to the emperor, and they actually spread news of what the emperor wanted them to do. Now, how did these people get appointed to these offices? Well, this is where the civil service exam comes into play. And with the civil service exam, you are seeing that people study for years. And these are like teenagers or young people. These young people study and then they take a test, kind of like the SAT or the ACT. And if these young men do well on the civil service exam, they are given a place in the government to work. So if they do well, they are rewarded with a job. If you do not pass or do well on the civil service exam, unfortunately, you do not qualify and you will not be able to join the scholar class or the landowner class unless your family already started there. So the idea that if you work hard, you can join the elite is something called a meritocracy. We saw this idea of a meritocracy when we talked about the Mongols, which again was kind of out of order by the time you're seeing this video. But a meritocracy means that if you do well, you will get rewarded for it. So if you work hard and you pass the civil service exam, you're rewarded with a job. It doesn't matter if you start off as a farmer or a landowner, you can actually move up to become a scholar. Pardon. One final note about politics was that the Song Dynasty actually kind of crashed and kind of dissolved because so many people, or I should say so many men, took the civil service exam that they had to create so many more government jobs. And there were more jobs than there were really a need for. And when you have too many jobs spread over too much space, you have more people that need to be paid than you are getting money, which led to the economy crashing. Going into interactions with the government, going into interactions with the environment. The Song Dynasty actually came up with this idea of sending out a guy to explore the world and talking about how amazing China is to other places. And we're going to see people like Ibn Battuta and Zheng He go around and travel and basically just show off how amazing China is. We're not actually going to see Zheng He go out into the world until the Ming Dynasty, but the thought was there because we're seeing the development of Chinese junks, which are amazing, huge ships. We're seeing the Chinese develop a lot of their maritime, aka ocean, technology. And we're seeing that they're beginning to create a lot of earth-based industries, such as digging into the earth and finding coal, or going into like caves and finding coal. Coal can be used to burn and would power like forges where people would make like metals and stuff, um, or they could use it as an energy source. Additionally, they also created steel. Um, you actually create steel by forging iron and removing the carbon. So it's a pretty scientific process, but they were actually able to develop this as early as like around 1000 CE. So pretty advanced stuff. All right, going into cultural aspects of the Song Dynasty. When we're looking at the culture, we are looking at the beginnings of early book printing. And they would actually carve their characters onto blocks of wood. And those individual characters would be set up in rows. They would paint ink over it and then press the paper to that wet ink on top of the wood blocks. And boom, you have a page with all of your typed stuff on it. So this is the earliest streamlined version of printing books. And this actually inspires Europe, specifically Germany, to create something called the Gutenberg press, which is a slightly more advanced version of the woodblock printing. But by having this version of woodblock printing, people are able to create more books more easily, and so more people had access to literature. This is one of the greatest successes of the Song Dynasty. Additionally, when we're looking at religion and philosophy, Confucian ideas are really waging a battle with Buddhist ideas. And there's this clash between, should we follow more of the moderation path, or should we follow more of the Eightfold Path, or should we go off and join a Buddhist temple, or should we maintain our filial piety through Confucian ideas? One final thing that we would like to that we should highlight when it comes to cultural things is this idea of kowtow. And when you did this, this was a sign of respect towards the emperor. Foreigners who came to visit China were expected to kowtow to the emperor or to just Chinese people. And this was especially true for the tributary states, aka the places that China tried to conquer. And you'll see them pop up in terms of Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And so people who were attempted to be conquered in these areas were expected to show respect to the Chinese emperor. A Chinese emperor was kind of considered a big deal because, in terms of Chinese history and thought process, China was thought to be the center of the universe. And so everything else rotated around China. And since the heavens decided who the emperor was, everybody else should also bow down to the Chinese emperor. Going into economics, aka money and trade and businesses. When we are looking at money and trade and businesses in Song Dynasty China, we are looking at something called proto-industrialization. This is the idea that as China became more involved in world trade through the monsoon marketplace and through the Silk Roads, a lot of peasants were like, hey, I can get rich by making stuff to sell to people. And so all of these peasants were like stopping farming, like they weren't farming food or like, things that they needed to live. Instead, they would like try to make, products that people would want. They would want to grow, or they would want to have silkworms so that they can harvest the silk to make fine linens. They would want to make porcelain or lacquerware so that they could sell that. So this idea of proto-industrialization is that, you have too many goods in your marketplace. And when you have too many luxuries and not enough necessities, your government and your country becomes unstable. And they were not getting enough food to really keep their people fed effectively, because more and more of the peasants or people in the rural or the country areas were trying to keep up with foreign demands for Chinese goods. Another thing about the economic status was this idea of public labor. So previously, what happened in ancient China was that if the emperor wanted to build a road, then an official would come and would say, "You peasants, you need to build this thing for our emperor." And they'd be like, "Yep, okay, dude, sure. Whatever the emperor says goes." But with the new Song Dynasty ruler, what they ended up doing was they actually ended up paying people to be laborers instead of just forcing them in order to do stuff. So they would have specific laborers to do these jobs and get paid for it instead of just telling the nearby peasants that they had to do this job. So this was really good for morale, and this was a good thing to develop just from an economic standpoint. It created jobs and it really helped stimulate the economy. When we're looking at technology, the Chinese were the first to develop gunpowder, and after gunpowder, they were able to create guns. The guns actually were traveling through the Silk Roads as people bought and sold them. And when they reached Europe, the Europeans kind of developed them further. And later on, you're going to see that guns travel throughout Asia again as you're seeing colonization or countries trying to take other countries under their control. But for right now, you're just going to see the Chinese created guns and gunpowder, and they are bought and sold through the Silk Roads. Going back to steel, we talked about steel earlier, but the idea is that they were the first to really remove the carbon from the iron, which created super high quality swords and weapons. And so you're going to see the development of these specialized weapons. You're going to see katana. You're going to see like these heavy spears. You're going to see high quality swords and daggers and knives. And you're going to see an improvement even in farming technology too, because steel is harder to break and is higher quality than iron. Iron dulls and rusts more easily than steel, so that was a huge advancement. Additionally, at this time, we are seeing that China becomes the largest, well, okay, it's not the largest manufacturing country, but it has the biggest manufacturing ability in the world at this time. They're able to create stuff at a very high rate, and they are able to just get these goods out and about and like really just get their people to create. So this leads to them being one of the largest manufacturing countries with the largest ability in the world, around 1,000. So, Romeo, when you're going to the Chinese influence on their tributary states, you'll have to watch the other lecture videos, but this is just Song Dynasty China in a nutshell. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will do my best to walk you through it. Thank you.